Welcome, friends. You are listening to the Maitri podcast between friends, conversations with Maitri. This is your host, Nandini Ray, and in this episode, we will try to focus on a couple of things like what today's youth want in their intimate partner relationships. What do they expect from their partners? And what kind of support do they need from their communities and families in making their relationships healthy? Four students from UCLA are joining me today, and I would like them to introduce themselves. Would you please introduce yourselves?
I can go first. My name is Chaitanya Basham, originally from Dallas, Texas, and I'm currently studying physics at college. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I can go next. My name is Shivani Kapoor. I'm from Riverside, California. It's a small city in Southern California, and I'm currently studying biochemistry and economics.
Hi, I'm Nishant Jain. I'm a third year. We're all third years here at UCLA. I'm from the Bay Area, Pleasanton, California, and I'm studying data theory here at UCLA.
Hello, I'm Pavana Atawale. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm also from the Bay Area, California, Cupertino, and I study computer science here at UCLA.
Wow, a room full of UCLA students. I'm really hoping to learn a lot from you. First of all, thank you for being here. As we all know that February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, and what can be more appropriate topic to discuss in this month than healthy dating relationship? I'm glad that you are here today, and you are interested to talk about this issue, because I know that our aim is to create a culture of healthy partner relationships. So, and those of us who have had partner relationships, we know that if we have or want to have a romantic relationship, we probably want to have a healthy one, right? But what is a healthy relationship exactly? So healthy relationship may look like, may not look the same for everyone, since different people have different needs, and the expectation may not be the same at every stage of our lives. It can be different in when we are in 20s versus 40s and 50s, but there should be some common criteria to understand if a partner relationship is healthy or not. So I'm very much interested to know what today's youth think. Are they thinking differently from their parents' generation? So here is my warm-up question. What do you think are the four most important qualities that dating partners should have in their relationship?
I can kick it off. Again, I'm Nishant. And a couple of things I think are super important. And these are qualities also, like, I think we're also young. I'm only 20, so still learning, especially in my relationship right now. But I would say a couple of big things. One would be trust. And I think everyone says like trust is important, but I really don't think it's something that you can undervalue. Trust is super important in a relationship between you and your partner, and making sure that you trust one another in situations when you're together, when you're not together, and things like that. And that kind of leads into the next one, which I think is like communication. So when you are, again, like on the same page about things, not on the same page about things, it's important to just kind of have an understanding where your partner's at in terms of like headspace. So communicating and trust. Another one is, I would say, an alignment of priorities and values. And what I mean by that is you kind of want to make sure with your partner you're in a similar direction, or you at least are able to support each other in each other's goals. So having an understanding of each other's, like I said, like their priorities, what each person values. And I feel like a relationship is bound to be successful when those align between two people. And I would say for the fourth, then have to think a little bit harder for that. But building on trust, building on communication, building on alignment of priorities, values, is also just kind of knowing how to navigate your differences. I feel like it's easy to communicate and have trust when you're on the same page about everything, but it's harder, and it should be hard when you aren't on the same page about things. How do you navigate that, and making sure, based on those last three things I said, you're able to kind of come to a consensus. You're able to, strike a good balance of talking to one another. Maybe if you do consult a friend or something, it's not like oversharing, but that's okay. You need to consult another friend. So just making sure you have a very healthy understanding of where the other person's at, how they're dealing with it. And when you do have differences, talking it out and making sure that ultimately you can be on the same page.
Wonderful points. And I would like to know what Shivani thinks.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything Nishant said. I think it's super important to have trust and communication. It's the good foundation of any strong relationship. Doesn't even have to be romantic, but super important in that realm. I think 4 really important qualities in a dating partner is presence and like feeling heard. If you're like sitting with someone and you're talking to them, maybe even just about something super random, like sharing a fact with them, you see them like checking their phone. I think it indicates like they're not really present there with you, and all of a sudden you maybe feel like, okay, what I have to say isn't valuable enough for you to actually maybe just take out 5 minutes to really listen to me. Like, I know people are busy, but when you do take out time to really just sit with people, I think being present is super important. Another one is respect. Like,
For all of us, right? We all are on, constantly checking phones, and
yeah.
be mindful about that. Yeah, excellent point. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I think another super important one is respect. I think we should respect everything in general, but especially like when you're so close to someone, like someone that's supposed to be kind of one of like the most important people in your life, you're not always going to share the same opinions. This kind of goes with what Nishant was saying. You're not always going to have the same opinions, but like being able to understand where they're coming from and respect their opinion. I understand where you're coming from. Maybe I don't agree, but I want to know your thought process, like what you have to say values. There's value to it. And I want you to know that I respect that.
Yeah, respectfully disagreeing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And another one I think is support and validation. You don't always, I think, need to kind of agree with what another person is doing. But when you're constantly like, if someone's excited and is like, oh, like, I think I'm gonna go try this new art hobby that I got, and it's like, hey, like, like you have your project to do, like, why aren't you doing your project? You're not supporting another person's desire or like what they want to do. And then that also creates drift, because all of a sudden that person's not going to necessarily want to share those things with you, or is going to get excited to share those things with you. And subconsciously, like, you might not even realize it at the moment, but you're creating this drift in your relationship. So I think like being supportive and like obviously voicing your opinion is also super important, but also being like, hey, like, you know what, like you're your own people, independent people, you can do what you want to do. So I think support is a really big one. And then last one is like consideration. Like, if we're eating dinner and you get water for yourself, like, get water for your partner too. I think it's just like common courtesy.
How sweet.
Yeah, so I think just like consideration, support, respect, and being present, those are just like super important things. Again, like kind of for any relationship, but when it's like someone that's supposed to be your person, I think it's extremely important.
How about you, Chaitanya?
I hadn't thought about the alignment of values part that Nishant was talking about. I think that is really important too, especially now in our relationships, because we're starting to be young adults now. And I think the relationships we are trying to form now, partner relationships, are something that we might be actually like considering a future with and being with this person. And if that's going to work out, you do have to really put in the effort to kind of like align your lives. And if it's too much effort to do that, then that might cause some stress and unhealthy stuff. But yeah, for me personally, I think one big thing, which is probably a general thing too, is honesty. And this is similar to what Shivani and Nishant were saying. This is it sounds like a given, but it's the hardest thing to do sometimes when things are uncomfortable, and when it actually matters, right? I mean, it matters all the time for the little things, but it matters the most, I'd say, when there's some sense of conflict, your partner has done something that made you uncomfortable, or you made your partner uncomfortable, which is bound to happen at some point in a committed relationship. But actually bringing that up and kind of like the fear of spoiling this kind of ideal relationship trope that we've built up in our heads, is scary to do. But it's also crucial if you want to face challenges together and grow together. And that kind of brings me to my next quality, which I find very important, which is patience. Having a patient partner is something that I definitely need. And I think it's what a lot of people need. It's comforting to know that your partner is not gonna vilify you for a small mistake you made. Maybe they'll hold you accountable, which is good. But they're on your side. It's not you versus them. I've heard this a lot recently. It's both of you versus the problem, right? Not you versus them. So yeah, and in terms of patience, it's just that in a partner relationship, you're both people, you're not perfect. Things will happen on both sides, and you have to kind of slow down and talk through it together. And you also have to be able to realize that you're both people growing, and these growths might kind of diverge and come back together. They might take little winding routes that wasn't that clear at the start of the relationship, but these are things that we can put in effort to work through together. So yeah, patience is important to me.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are so right. And
Yeah.
sometimes, and also what you just said, that we are human being, we can make mistake, but it's important to acknowledge that mistake and to let our partners know that, yes, I'm sorry, and I will change my behavior that is
Yeah.
bothering you. So
I-
yes, wonderful ideas. And what about you, Pavana?
All qualities that have been said so far are amazing. I completely agree with all of them. I think I have a couple more that I haven't heard mentioned. One specifically is empathy. I guess that's just another way of wording what was already mentioned, under having compassion and remembering people's individualities. And like Chai was saying, remembering that sometimes you make mistakes. That can also go in a positive direction. Sometimes people do great things, and it's great, like Shivani is saying, to support and validate your partner. Another one, which I don't know if I heard mentioned, was just having fun with your partner. There's a reason why you're together. You want to be together. You have chosen each other. And I think that's a really important thing, that especially in topics like these, when we're talking about relationships and healthy relationships, it's convenient to forget that. So yeah, just have fun with your partner and enjoy the time that you do spend together.
So what I have heard from all of you, if I am, if you are asking me to summarize in 2 lines, I would say that in partner relationship, whatever you do, your relationship should contribute to a sense of fulfillment, happiness, and connection. And if you tend to feel more anxious, distressed, or unhappy around your partner, then your relationship may be struggling. Maybe you have some red flags in your relationship, right?
I would agree with that. I think that there's definitely periods of time where it can be uncomfortable in any relationship, but I don't think you should feel anxious around your partner, period. I think that if that's happening, then I think it's heading in a wrong direction. I think even when problems are happening, conflicts are arising, there should be a safe space set up between you and your partner to where you can sit, and maybe it's a bit uncomfortable, but you're not scared. You're not like they don't frighten you. They're still comforting in a way, even if it's uncomfortable in that moment. So
Yes.
I think that's an important thing to bring up. And this is like, I think the patience and honesty I was talking about goes hand in hand, because you have to talk about these hard things and be honest, but you have to do it in a patient, kind, empathetic way. You can't yell at your partner all the time and expect them to like be okay with that. So yeah.
Exactly. We all have ideas about how our relationship should or will proceed. And some of these ideas we have nurtured since childhood by seeing couples in our families or relatives, or sometimes we formed it through media exposures, etc. But many times we don't even contemplating the fact that whether it is a right behavior or wrong behavior. I will tell you a story. One of my friends used to compare his wife with his mom all the time. Like, it's not he's an abusive person or bad person, but he always used to make fun of his wife. And like, my mom is such a good cook. Our house in India is a tip-top condition, always tip-top condition, so clean. In here in this country, I'm literally scared to invite my guest, as my wife doesn't cook with care. My house is a mess all the time, and my wife is giving more attention to her career than making our house to a home. And surprisingly, I haven't seen her wife, protest. On the contrary, she used to say, yes, yes, I should have been more careful in making the house tidy, or I will learn some dishes from internet, something like that. As if like she used to feel ashamed that she's not doing her duty. So one day I told my friend that, hey, your mom was a homemaker. Yes, it is a most noble, unpaid job, but she loved being a homemaker. But you married to your colleague, and she is as busy as you are outside. So when you are outside, you guys are outside, you are equal. But the moment you come home, your expectations change. And you enjoy just like making fun of your wife without even noticing that whether it is right or wrong. So in the follow-up conversation we discussed a lot about this thing, about this issue. And in that conversation, I found out that patriarchal cultural conditioning is so deep that we actually normalize wrong behavior. Like the husband thought it is wife's duty, why she's not making good food or whatever, the house, clean house. And the wife thought it is so cultural conditioning that she starts believing that she is not doing her duty. So in my generation, by the way, I'm your parents' generation, I'm from your parents' generation. So in my generation, many times I have seen that socially constructed gender roles impact on partner relationships. So what is happening in your generation? Do you feel what men and women want in an intimate relationship is prescribed by socially constructed gender role expectations? And do these expectations impact partner relationship a negative way in your generation or create conflict? What do you think?
I think that we're all in college, and like kind of all of our friends are still in college. We're all not at home, like living in apartments and dorms with our friends. So right now, in terms of like, let's say like long-term marriage type of like family dynamic, we personally may not have experienced like a huge prominence of gender roles. But I do think there are some things that maybe women want more in a relationship compared to like what men may want in a relationship. I think a lot of women just want to be like noticed, like heard, asked about, maybe have like emotionally intelligent conversations, maybe literally just kind of just like sit with someone, spend time with them, like in silence, even just like just to be comforted. I think men also want the same thing. I think it's like goes both ways. You want to feel comfortable, you want to feel safe, you want to have that person a home away from home. But I also think like they also want to go out with their friends, and like that's also part of our age, and like like generally like want to have a good time. But like I said, I think we're also just, our generation is just younger right now. So like in terms of gender roles in a more like long-term age relationship dynamic is just not prominent, at least to me.
Shivani, but still I don't know. I mean, I'm not from your generation, so I'm just trying to find out in any ways, in a subtle ways, probably, do you see somewhere that the expectation is different from men and women in a partner relationship? Maybe a very subtle way, but is there any different expectations? I don't know. I'm just asking. Because in my generation, I have seen a lot of, differentiation, but in your generation, I'm just trying to find out. If it is not, then I'll be really happy, but just what do you think?
I'm sure there are. I'm sure there's a lot of actually like subtle, kind of not to the eye, maybe like within a relationship, it's more noticeable. But I think to the outside eye looking in a college setting, I don't think I necessarily see that much, which is a great thing, like you said.
Yeah, I can just hop in really quick and say, I kind of started thinking about this because of what Shivani said about like going out and having a good time. What I do see sometimes is like maybe like this patriarchal structure kind of imposes itself, and the result, I think, sometimes in college settings is that maybe like boyfriends are kind of like controlling when it comes to like their girlfriends going out and having fun, while they are fine to like go out and do whatever and have fun, and like, you know, going out with the boys is like totally fine and normal, and of course I should be able to do that. But then they get kind of uncomfortable, and when their girlfriends goes out with her friends, and then it's like, oh, why are you having fun without me? Like, what's going on? So I guess that is a little double standard, and I do think its roots are in these like gender roles that the male should kind of have the final say or something, which is kind of sad. It's sad to see that happening. I don't see it too much, which is good, but
maybe decreasing a lot.
Yeah,
generation to your generation.
Yeah, and definitely in the relationships I see that are like close to me in my life, I do actually see a good balance of I guess power and say. And I mean, I just see mutual respect on both sides in that sense. I think our generation will have a kind of interesting thing where in a lot of the relationships, both partners will be in the like career space, working, doing all of that. So it will be kind of interesting to see how we can navigate that and build, a home together and work through all these things. Because I think the home responsibilities will be like divided up between both partners. So
just to add on, especially when we're thinking about, I completely agree with what both Chai and Shivani are saying, is currently in the place where our generation is right now in high school or college or early adulthood, it's not that prevalent to see these traditional expectations of what gender roles should be. I think another layer that our generation maybe deals with more publicly or externally than say our parents' generations or grandparents' generations is when we're talking about queer relationships, same-sex relationships. For example, I identify as queer. Any relationships that I will enter are probably not going to be with someone who identifies as a man. So that throws a whole wrench into thinking about these gender role expectations, especially as we think about growing older, building lives together. So for example, when I grow older, my partner will probably be raised as a woman, identify as a woman. And seeing that and the way the gender roles between two women or two men interact with each other in a romantic relationship partner setting is very different than our parents' generations and the traditional example of gender roles that you have given. I think there is a way that queer relationships can also be affected by these traditional gender roles. For example, especially when you're talking about outside of the relationship looking in, like what Shivani was talking about earlier, there is a lot of insensitive comments. There are a lot of invalidation of queer relationships and queer families that these same-sex couples build. And that traditionally does come from the patriarchy. That comes from these traditional gender role expectations that we're talking about. And I think that's something that our generation has to deal with on a bigger role or a more public view than previous generations.
Exactly. Great that you brought this point. Nishant?
Yeah, actually, yeah, thanks, Bhavna, for bringing that like insight, because I feel like when I heard this question, I honestly wasn't, my brain was thinking strictly like to male-female relationships. So I think that helped me kind of open my mind too, to kind of thinking about like just like the general impacts of like societal gender roles on relationships overall. Just anecdotally, thinking personally to me, like between me and my girlfriend, I think I do my best, and I think it's my job too as a male in this relationship with my girlfriend, is like as being as aware as I can of like what are traditional societal norms and how can we make sure we avoid the ones that will like negatively impact our relationship. And while also I think exist as like firmly as it did in the past in like my parents' generation, where there were a lot more like from India, the when they grew up in India, there are a lot more traditional gender roles where and this is just for the sake of example, like, yeah, maybe the woman was expected to more take care of the family, take care of the home, the kitchen, whereas the male was more expected to maybe be the breadwinner of the family and go to work. I definitely think, like, I think Chai touched on this, like, I don't really feel, I think our generation is doing a really good job of moving away from that. This kind of touched on like what I touched on earlier too, like having similar priorities. I think that's important, and like supporting each other in your aspirations. So I think that's something that our generation is doing a good job of moving away from. I do think though there are some gender roles which aren't necessarily a bad thing. What I mean by that is when it comes to like males, like the idea of being a gentleman, and whether that be like, especially like something that you see for a lot of people our age, or like, like if you're gonna be a guy, like do things like open the door for the girl or be respectful, or maybe pay on the first date, which I don't think these things are necessarily, I do think they are stem from the patriarchy, and it's important to be aware of that. But I do think there's some good things that you can take out of it, which is, and I think is my role as, to my girlfriend and being a boyfriend, is how can I treat her with as much respect as she deserves, while also making sure that, we keep it equal and keep a balance of, not playing into like these traditional, detrimental, truly, gender roles, but also recognizing where I can do my job in supporting her. And maybe does that stem from a gender role? It could, but making sure that it's in the light of, supporting myself as well and her. So yeah, I do think gender roles do exist, but I don't think they're also nearly as extreme as they were for generations before us. And I think our generation is doing a good job of being progressive and looking forward in terms of how maybe then the female is going to be the breadwinner of the family, and it maybe doesn't matter who's the breadwinner of the family. Why does it matter about the genders, things like that? So yeah, I think it exists and it's real, but I also think there's a lot more awareness nowadays too, on how to avoid the.
A lot of awareness is, yeah, that is true. But what I sometimes, notice that patriarchal gender roles blur the line between what it's supposed to be and what we expect. For example, masculinity and toxic masculinity. Like, I believe masculinity itself is not inherently bad or toxic, but when patriarchal society gives a different meaning to masculinity, then it creates problem. Like when it prescribes that if you want to be a man, then you need to portray yourself as tough, aggressive, emotionless, superior, heterosexual. And then this kind of toxic masculinity can interfere with a healthy relationship. Don't you think so? That if masculinity becomes toxic masculinity, what sometimes the distinction is blurred, can interfere with healthy relationship. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. This is a huge thing. Masculinity can be something that, a man takes and makes his own, and it can be something that helps someone feel good about themselves. For example, I guess like if you have a really good workout, maybe you like are like, yeah, I'm such a like strong man, you might feel like good about yourself, but like the problem is these things start to become harmful to others. And when this idea of masculinity is merged with all of the patriarchy, the social roles that we talked about earlier. And I think one big thing about this, which is kind of maybe I don't hear as much, is that like this is really bad for the man too. Like this mindset. When you put yourself in this like emotionless box and you don't allow yourself to actually do like basic things like cry and be honest with yourself and sit with your emotions, and then one, it negatively impacts your partner because that person is emotionally tied to you very closely, and if you're not processing your emotions, then that is going to harm them.
Yeah,
But
not showing your true authenticity to your partner, right?
yeah, exactly. And second, it harms you as a person, and
It makes you unhappy, and if you are unhappy, then how can you make your partner happy?
exactly. And this is like one big example I can think of this. Think one big example that comes to mind is how we have this idea that men should not go to therapy, right? As a man growing up here, it was weird if I went to therapy. And like none of my friends did, so I was like, okay, something must be wrong with me, right? Um and now I'm seeing a lot more stuff on the internet that's it's okay to go to therapy, especially in the South Asian from the South Asian perspective, right? That's another an added level of stigma is that South Asian children shouldn't go to therapy. But especially as a South Asian man, I think it was viewed as a very like red flag. Okay, this guy does not have his stuff together. He's not going to be successful. He's not what
Yeah,
society wants.
extra layers of burdens.
Exactly. So yeah, I think it's harmful, and that's kind of my perspective. Everyone has a lot to gain from actually understanding their emotions and talking to people and being vulnerable, right? So
anyone else wants to, because we are almost time.
Yeah, I can go. I'm taking a gender and globalization class right now. And last week we analyzed this study in Nepal, which is like a very traditional country. A lot of gender norms that you were talking about are very prevalent there. So what economists and social injustice workers did is they analyzed in Nepal, like over a period of time, as women became more educated and gained more jobs, more employment, and like actually gained an income of their own, they hypothesized that like a woman's fallback position would be better. They'd have more bargaining power in the house if they needed to get divorced, which also isn't very common in countries like Nepal. They would be able to because they would have more income of their own, they would have support, they would have a voice, right? What they actually found is it supported the male backlash model. So as these women were getting more educated, gained their income, were getting more employed, sexual, domestic, emotional, and physical violence went up by a really large percentage. And I think it's just like, it's that difference you were talking about between masculinity and toxic masculinity is because when they asked these men were like, hey, like, I don't want my woman to even go to the store. Like, I need to do that for her, And like, sure, it's nice to want to do that for your partner, but at what point is it like are you controlling her? And it's like, if she earns an income of her own, are you being insecure and projecting onto her? So I think it's really important, like, to take that into consideration. And yeah, it's interesting because it really fit into this
Interesting.
topic
Yeah.
of toxic masculinity. But yeah,
Wow, that is super interesting. Thanks for sharing, Shivani.
yeah, thank you.
I love this discussion, and I wish I could continue for another day, probably. But today I need to pause here. But before we leave, I would like to ask my guest, all of you, that what is the role of youth in preventing unhealthy power dynamics in relationship? If you can share your tips, points.
A lot of us are first generation in America, and our parents coming from India, they bring a lot of really good things like their culture, their traditions. But then also like some of those traditions were these traditional type of gender roles. And I think our parents, as also they came here, they started realizing what these gender roles looked like and being able to kind of take a step back and realize how some of those were toxic. So as we're growing up here with modern times, I think it's kind of our role as youth to be aware, kind of look back at our parents' relationship. And I think we all were privileged to grow up in relatively good homes. And in that sense, thinking back is like, going forward, how can we be the best that we can be in preventing toxic masculinity? So for like me and Chaitanya, as guys, how can we make sure that we're as aware as possible of maybe where these ideas of toxic masculinity can come from? And how can we also be open to feedback, have an open mind? That's really important on the male side, because maybe I'm doing something as a male where I'm not even aware that it's toxic. But then maybe my partner tells me, hey, this was wrong. So then being open to feedback, like, oh, I'm being able to be like, I'm sorry, recognize where you went wrong, and improve on it going forward. So I think just keeping an open mind as youth, being as aware as we can. And then the last thing, touching back to what everyone was saying before, is being vulnerable. I think that's really big. And I think that's really big on the man side too, and preventing toxic masculinity and preventing these unhealthy power dynamics is, I've talked about this with my parents, honestly. My parents and I had this conversation a couple months ago, and they were saying one thing that they're doing now to really improve their relationship between the two of them is learning how to be more and more vulnerable with one another. And they were telling me and my sister, in order to improve all of our relationships with one another, it's just a matter of being open, being honest, authentic about our emotions. And I think that also applies in relationships with partners as well.
Those are great points. I think definitely being vulnerable with not only your partner, but like Nishant is saying, your bigger family community. That is only going to help strengthen your own relationship, in my opinion. And to add on, education is really important. Not only us educating ourselves through all this crazy internet that we have at our fingertips, but also practicing that. We learn so many things through media that we consume. For example, this podcast, maybe the other couples that we notice. But it is really important to take those tips and tricks and maybe the what to do and what not to do and actually practice them in our everyday, in our own relationship, in our own lives. And that's something that I think our generation has a bigger opportunity to practice these because we have more knowledge and more access to this knowledge.
I agree with what Pavana and Nishant said. I think biggest thing is just keep communicating with your partner and finding out what their needs are, how to meet them best, how you can help them meet your needs better. And yeah, I think it's super important to stay aware about how gender roles did affect relationships in the past and still do today. And the lucky thing for us, I guess, is there's a ton of discourse on this at any given moment and it's very visible on a lot of our social media platforms, like even TikTok. Every day or so I'll see a video in my For You page that kind of changes my perspective on something. One other thing I'll say is that love comes in a lot of forms. It can be romantic love with your partners, but there's also a lot of love to be had outside of that with your friends and family. And all of these loves are things that we have to practice healthy habits with. And in fact, it's a kind of synergy type thing. I think if you have great loving relationships with your friends, and you put energy into those relationships, that will also like help you in your partner relationships and your family relationships. So yeah, all of these things are, we can keep on loving is what I'm gonna say. Yeah, just don't stop loving.
I think as youth nowadays, it's up to us to break generational cycles. And like what we're doing today here right now is also super important. Every conversation, anything you can learn from anybody, I've learned so much from all of you today, is something to be internalized and taken into account into breaking these gender norms and knowing like, hey, like this is not the future and this is the future that I see for our whole entire generation and each individual relationship within it.
Absolutely, you are absolutely right. And I'm also positive that I'm sure actually that with multiple community dialogues, this kind of discussion, collective actions, we will be one day, I'm sure one day we will be able to create a culture of healthy partner relationship. And thank you, Chaitanya, Pavana, Shivani, and Nishant for this wonderful discussion. Those who are listening to our show today, please remember that a shared love of hobbies or food or career, etc., might have helped you meet your partner. But these factors have little to do with keeping your relationship healthy over time. At the end of the day, partners should trust each other and feel safe together. Partners should have consent and respect in their relationships. Thank you for listening. This is your host, Nandini Ray, ending this episode with a hope that together we will create a culture of healthy partner relationship where all partners will feel safe, respected, heard, and seen. There will be no power imbalance in partner relationships, and there will be zero tolerance for partner violence and abuse.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Bye for now. Stay safe and happy. Keep listening to the Maitri podcast, Between Friends Conversations with Maitri. Find all our episodes on SoundCloud and other podcast apps. Please like, share, and comment. Thank you.
This show is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as legal advice. Always consult an attorney for legal advice. Views expressed by guests of the radio show are individual opinions and not endorsed by Maitri. This project was made possible by funding provided by Santa Clara County Office of Gender-Based Violence Prevention.